My name is Imani, and at 25 years old, I am sitting in a penthouse that used to belong to the people who tried to murder me. Most people think family is a safe harbor, where you go when the world gets too cold. For me, family was the storm itself. 5 years ago, on my 20th birthday, my parents and my wealthy brother-in-law threw me out of a cabin into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on my back. They locked the door and turned up the heat while I froze. They did it for an insurance payout of $5 million. What they did not know was that the freezing cold would not kill me. It would only preserve my rage until I could come back and take everything they owned. Before I tell you how I survived a night at -20 degrees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video if you have ever had to fight for your life against the people who were supposed to protect you. To understand why I am drinking vintage wine in this living room today, you have to go back to the moment the trap was set. It was exactly 2 weeks before the blizzard. I was not wearing designer silk back then. I was wearing a grease-stained uniform scrubbing the floor of a diner in downtown Chicago. I was working 3 jobs just to pay for my community college tuition and a studio apartment that smelled like mildew. My family had cut me off 2 years prior when I refused to sign over my grandmother's trust fund to my older sister Ebony. They called me selfish. They called me the black sheep. I had not heard a single word from them until my phone buzzed in my apron pocket that Tuesday afternoon. I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at the screen. The number was unsaved, but I knew it by heart. It was my father, Desmond. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. When I answered, his voice was smooth and warm like expensive whiskey. He told me happy birthday, Imani. He said your mother has been crying all week because she misses her baby girl. He told me they wanted to make things right. I stood there in the back of that noisy kitchen smelling like old frying oil and felt tears pricking my eyes. I was 20 years old and starving for parents who actually loved me. Then the phone was passed to Hunter. Hunter was my brother-in-law, a white man who worked on Wall Street and married my sister Ebony. He was the golden son-in-law my parents always wanted. His voice was different. It was confident and authoritative. He told me that he had rented a luxury cabin in Aspen for the weekend to celebrate my birthday and to heal the family rift. He said he had already bought me a first-class ticket and that a car would pick me up. He said we are family Imani and family forgives. I remember feeling a knot in my stomach. It felt too good to be true. I went home that night and told my best friend Maya about the call. Maya looked at me like I was crazy. She told me not to go. She said rich people do not just change overnight, Imani. She asked why they would invite me now after 2 years of silence. She said it smelled like a trap. I argued with her. I told her that maybe they really missed me. I told her that people change and that I just wanted my mom back. I wanted to believe it so badly that I ignored the warning bells ringing in my head. I ignored the fact that they never asked how I was paying my rent or if I was eating enough. I only heard what I wanted to hear. I packed my bag the next morning. I put in my only good sweater and a pair of boots that were 2 years old. I felt like Cinderella waiting for the carriage. I did not know that while I was packing my cheap suitcase, Hunter was sitting in his high-rise office in Manhattan, signing a document with a heavy fountain pen. If I could have seen him, then I would have run the other way. He was not planning a birthday party. He was finalizing a life insurance policy in my name. The camera in his office would have shown him smiling as he checked the box for accidental death double indemnity. The beneficiary line did not have my future children or a charity listed. It said, "The Vance Family Trust." He capped his pen and looked at my father, who was sitting across the desk. He said, "Do not worry, Desmond. By Monday morning, all our debt will be gone and she will just be a tragic accident." I got into the black car that afternoon thinking I was flying towards a new beginning. I had no idea I was flying straight into a massacre. The private car dropped me off at the foot of a driveway that looked more like a runway for the rich and famous. The cabin was a massive structure of timber and glass perched on the edge of a cliff. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see a fire roaring in a stone hearth that was likely taller than my entire apartment building. The snow was already falling heavily, transforming the world into a blur of white, but inside that house, everything glowed with a golden warmth. I took a deep breath and tightened my scarf. I told myself that this was a fresh start. I told myself that the knot in my stomach was just hunger and not a premonition. When I walked through the heavy oak double doors, the heat hit me first, smelling of pine and expensive vanilla candles. My mother Patricia was sitting on a white leather sofa holding a glass of Chardonnay. She did not stand up to hug me. She just tilted her head and looked at my boots. They were scuffed at the toes and wet from the snow. Her gaze moved up to my coat, which I had bought second-hand. She sighed loud enough for me to hear from the entryway. "You are tracking slush onto the hardwood, Amani." That was her first sentence to me in 2 years. Not hello, not happy birthday. Just a complaint about the floor. My sister Ebony was sitting across from her, surrounded by orange Hermes boxes. She looked up and flashed a smile that did not reach her eyes. She looked immaculate in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my tuition. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," she said. She held up a small crocodile skin handbag. "Hunter just bought this for me as a pre-trip gift. Do not touch it, please. Your hands look greasy." She went back to admiring the bag, completely dismissing my existence. I stood there feeling small and foolish, holding my battered suitcase. I wanted to turn around and walk back out into the snow right then. But then Hunter walked in from the kitchen. He was wearing a thick cable-knit sweater and carrying a tray of appetizers. He set the tray down and walked straight to me. He pulled me into a hug that felt solid and safe. "Ignore them," he whispered in my ear. "They are just stressed from the flight. I am really glad you came, Imani." He pulled back and smiled, his blue eyes crinkling with what looked like genuine affection. He took my coat and hung it up. He led me to the fire and made a show of clearing a space for me on the sofa. For the next hour, Hunter played the role of the perfect peacemaker. He steered the conversation away from my job. He complimented my hair. He refilled my mother's wine glass before she could ask. I started to relax. I started to think that maybe Maya was wrong. Maybe Hunter really was the bridge that could bring us back together. Outside, the wind began to howl. The snow was coming down in sheets now, burying the driveway and cutting us off from the main road. The storm that the news had warned about was finally here. "I am going to make some hot cocoa," Hunter announced, clapping his hands together. "It is a perfect night for it. Special recipe." He looked at me and winked. "You used to love cocoa when you were a kid, right, Amani?" I nodded, grateful for his kindness. He disappeared into the expansive kitchen. From where I sat, I could see his back. He was humming a tune. I watched him pour the milk into a saucepan. I saw him reach into the cupboard and pull out 4 mugs. 3 of them were identical white porcelain. The 4th one was red. I watched him stir the powder in. I saw his hand pause over the red mug. His body blocked my view for just a second. A quick, subtle movement of his wrist. If I had been paying closer attention, I might have wondered what he was doing. But I was distracted by Ebony asking me if I was still dating that loser mechanic. By the time I turned back to the kitchen, Hunter was already walking towards us with the tray. He handed the white mugs to Ebony and my mother. He picked up the red mug and held it out to me with both hands. "Happy birthday, Amani," he said softly. "Drink up. It will warm you right to your bones." I took the mug. The ceramic was hot against my frozen palms. I blew on the steam and took a sip. It was rich and chocolatey, but there was a strange metallic aftertaste buried under the sugar. I frowned slightly, but I did not want to be rude. I drank it all. 10 minutes later, the room started to tilt. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the fire in the hearth seemed to stretch and distort. My limbs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. I tried to lift my hand to rub my eyes, but my arm would not obey me. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me with a cold, unreadable expression. She was not drinking her cocoa. Neither was Ebony. I tried to speak. I wanted to say that I did not feel well, but my tongue felt thick and swollen in my mouth. A wave of exhaustion crashed over me so powerful that I slumped sideways against the cushions. The sounds in the room became muffled, as if I were underwater. I heard footsteps on the hardwood floor, slow, deliberate footsteps. Hunter stopped in front of me. He loomed over me, his face swimming in and out of focus. He was not smiling anymore. His face was a mask of indifference. He reached down and took the empty red mug from my limp fingers. He placed it gently on the coffee table. He leaned in close until his lips were right next to my ear. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me completely was his calm, steady voice. "Sleep well, little sister-in-law. Tomorrow, everything will be different." And then he laughed. A low, dry sound that sent a shiver through me even as my consciousness faded into black. I did not know that when I woke up, I would wish I had died in that sleep. The nightmare was just beginning. The first thing I felt was not the cold, but the rhythm. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It was a jarring, rhythmic motion that rattled my teeth and sent dull spikes of pain through my shoulders. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they were glued shut with ice. The air smelled different. The scent of pine and expensive vanilla candles was gone, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of ozone and freezing wind. My head was pounding a heavy, throbbing ache that pulsed behind my temples, a hangover from whatever poison Hunter had slipped into that red mug. I tried to groan to ask what was happening, but the sound died in my throat, coming out as nothing more than a ragged wheeze. Consciousness returned in jagged fragments. I realized my back was sliding against something hard and uneven. Snow. I was being dragged through deep snow. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, snapping my eyes open. The world was a blur of shadows and swirling white. Above me, tall pine trees swayed violently in the wind, their branches looking like skeletal fingers clawing at the dark sky. I was outside, in the storm, and I was not moving under my own power. Two figures were looming over me, pulling me by my arms as if I were a sack of garbage. I recognized the camel hair coat first. My father, Desmond. He was panting, his breath coming in white puffs of steam. On my other side was Hunter, moving with efficient, brutal strength. They were arguing, their voices raised over the howling wind. "Stop shaking, Desmond!" Hunter snapped, his voice cutting through the gale. "We are almost far enough. It needs to look like she got confused and wandered off the trail. Hypothermia makes people do crazy things. They strip, they get disoriented. It is a textbook accidental death." My father made a whimpering sound. "But she is awake, Hunter. Look at her eyes. She is looking at me." I tried to focus on my father's face. I wanted to beg him. I wanted to scream, "Daddy, help me!" But the drug paralyzed my tongue. I could only stare at him, pleading silently, willing him to remember the little girl he used to carry on his shoulders. Desmond looked down at me, and for a second I saw hesitation. I saw fear, but then I saw something worse. I saw him look away. He looked at the darkness of the forest instead of his daughter's eyes. "She is not awake," Hunter said dismissively. "That is just the involuntary muscle spasms. The sedative I gave her could knock out a horse. She does not feel a thing. Now help me with the coat." "No." The word screamed in my mind. Not my coat. It was 20 degrees below zero. That cheap wool coat was the only thing keeping the blood moving in my veins. But my arms were limp, useless weights at my sides. Hunter stopped dragging me and dropped my arm into the snow. The cold instantly bit through my thin sweater, feeling like 1,000 needles stabbing my skin. He roughly grabbed the lapels of my coat and yanked. I felt my father's hands fumbling with the buttons. His hands were shaking violently, but he did not stop. He was helping him. My own father was helping a stranger strip his daughter so she would freeze to death faster. The betrayal cut deeper than the wind. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and stinging, before freezing instantly on my cheeks. "I am sorry, Amani," my father whispered, his voice cracking. We just, we need the money. The business is in trouble. We did not have a choice. You always have a choice, I wanted to scream. But the coat was gone. The wind assaulted my body, stealing the last dregs of warmth in seconds. I was wearing nothing but jeans and a festive holiday sweater. I felt the heat leaving my core, escaping into the night. Hunter was not done. He reached into the pocket of my jeans. I felt his hand invade my space, rough and invasive. He pulled out my phone. Check for a signal, he ordered. No bars. Desmond confirmed. Even if she wakes up, she cannot call anyone. Good. Hunter looked down at me one last time. His face was indifferent, like he was inspecting a piece of faulty merchandise he was about to discard. Goodbye, Imani. You should have signed the trust fund papers when you had the chance. It would have been a lot less painful than this. He grabbed my ankles and spun me around. We were at the edge of a ravine, a steep drop-off where the snow had drifted high against the rocks. With a grunt of effort, he shoved me. The world spun. I tumbled down the embankment, hitting rocks and hidden roots. Snow filled my mouth, my nose, my ears. I rolled and crashed until I came to a stop at the bottom of the gully, half buried in a drift. The impact knocked the wind out of me, leaving me gasping for air that felt like broken glass in my lungs. I lay there broken and freezing, unable to move. High above me on the ridge, I saw two silhouettes standing against the gray sky. They watched for a moment, making sure I did not get up. Then they turned around. I heard the crunch of their boots fading away. Then came the sound of a car engine starting. It roared to life, a powerful, expensive sound that cut through the storm. I saw the red glow of taillights wash over the snow at the top of the ridge, bathing the forest in the color of blood. And then the lights faded. The engine noise grew distant until it was swallowed by the wind. They were gone. My family had left me. They had driven back to the warm cabin, to the fire, to the wine. They would probably practice their fake tears for the police report while I lay here, my heart rate slowing down, the cold creeping into my bones like a slow-acting poison. I was alone in the dark, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be an orphan. The cold was terrifying, yes, but the fire of hatred that ignited in my chest was the only thing keeping me warm. They thought this was the end of my story. As I watched the last snowflake drift down onto my eyelashes, I swore to myself that if I survived this night, it would only be the beginning of theirs. I do not know how long I lay at the bottom of that ravine. Time had lost its meaning, measured only by the rhythmic stinging of the snow hitting my face. The darkness was absolute, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. My body had stopped shivering. That was the most terrifying part. I had read somewhere that when you stop shivering, it means your body has given up the fight. It means the end is close. I could feel a seductive warmth spreading through my limbs, a hallucination that whispered to me to just close my eyes and sleep. It would be so easy. Just let go. But then a flash of anger pierced through the fog in my brain. It was hot and sharp. I saw Hunter's face. I saw the indifference in my father's eyes. They were probably back at the cabin now, pouring another glass of wine, toasting to their newfound wealth. They were banking on me dying quietly in the dark. If I closed my eyes now, I was signing the check for them. No. I gritted my teeth, forcing my jaw to move. I am not going to die. Not like this. I rolled onto my stomach. The movement sent a bolt of agony through my ribs, but pain was good. Pain meant I was still alive. I dug my fingers into the frozen earth beneath the snow and pulled. I dragged myself forward, inch by inch, a broken creature clawing its way through hell. My jeans were frozen stiff, scraping against my skin like sandpaper. Ahead of me, through the swirling white chaos, I saw a shape. It was rectangular and rigid, darker than the trees. A structure. It looked like an old abandoned ranger station or maybe a tool shed left behind by loggers. It was barely standing, the roof sagging under the weight of the snow, but it was shelter. I do not remember reaching the door. I only remember collapsing against the rough wood, my strength finally failing. I tried to knock, but my hand was a useless lump of ice. I slumped forward, my forehead resting against the doorframe, and waited for the end. Suddenly, the door was wrenched open. Light spilled out dim and orange, accompanied by a blast of heat that felt like a physical blow. A figure loomed over me, bundled in layers of rags. Distinct smell of wood smoke and unwashed wool hit me. Strong hands grabbed the collar of my sweater. I was not lifted gently. I was dragged across the floorboards, the wood scraping against my numb legs. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the howl of the wind. "You are not dying on my watch, girl." The voice was raspy, like gravel grinding together. I felt rough hands on my face, slapping my cheeks. "Wake up. Do not you dare fade out on me." I forced my eyes open. A woman was kneeling over me. Her face was weathered, mapped with deep lines of hardship, her gray hair matted under a dirty beanie. I knew that face. It was the woman from the bus station, the one I had given my last $5 to before I left Chicago, Ms. Hattie. She did not offer me pity. She went to work with a brutal efficiency. She grabbed my hands and began to rub them vigorously, the friction burning my frozen skin. It hurt. It hurt so much I wanted to scream, but my throat was too dry. "Stop," I croaked weakly. "Shut up," she snapped. "Not stopping. If I do not do this, you lose the fingers." "Do you want to lose the fingers?" She reached for a bottle of dark liquid sitting near a small rusty wood stove in the corner. She uncorked it with her teeth and pressed it to my lips. "Drink. It is practically jet fuel, but it will start your heart again." I gagged as the liquid hit my tongue. It burned all the way down, exploding in my empty stomach. But she was right. I could feel the blood beginning to pump, sluggish and painful, returning to my extremities. Hattie sat back on her heels, watching me with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are the girl from the station, the one with the kind eyes. I told you not to trust the wolves, did I not?" I nodded slowly, tears leaking from my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer agony of thawing out. "My family," I whispered. They threw me out." I figured Hattie said, throwing a ragged blanket over my shoulders. "Nobody ends up in a ravine in a blizzard by accident. Not dressed like that." I sat up, clutching the blanket, my body trembling violently as the feeling returned. I looked down at myself. I was wearing the oversized dress shirt I had put on under my sweater for dinner. It was one of Hunter's old shirts he had given me when I spilled coffee on mine a year ago. It was high-quality cotton, pale blue. Hattie's eyes dropped to the shirt. Her expression changed instantly. The pity vanished, replaced by a look of pure, cold hatred. She reached out her finger, tracing the small embroidered logo on the pocket. A stylized V, intertwined with a C. "Where did you get this shirt?" Her voice was a low growl. My brother-in-law gave it to me." I stammered, confused by her intensity. "Why Vance Capital?" Hattie whispered the name like a curse. I stared at her. "How do you know that name?" Hattie let out a bitter, dry laugh. She stood up and walked to the small window, looking out into the storm. "You think I was always a homeless woman living in a shack, girl? You look at me and you see trash. But 5 years ago I was wearing silk suits just like the man who owns that shirt." She turned back to me, her eyes blazing in the dim light. "I was the head forensic accountant for Vance Capital for 15 years. I knew where every single penny was buried. I knew about the offshore accounts. I knew about the Ponzi schemes they used to rob pension funds." My heart stopped. Hunter worked for Vance Capital. He was a senior partner. "I found the discrepancies." Hattie continued, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I went to the board. I thought I was doing the right thing. 2 days later, they planted drugs in my car. They wiped my bank accounts. They ruined my reputation so thoroughly that I could not get a job sweeping floors. They took my house. They took my life. And the man who signed off on my termination, The man who smiled while he destroyed me. She pointed a shaking finger at the logo on my chest. Hunter Vance. Or Hunter Phillips, as he calls himself now. He married into a respectable family to clean up his image, didn't he? I sat there stunned into silence. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with a deafening click. Hunter wasn't just a greedy husband. He was a professional predator. And he had just tried to kill the only two people who knew the truth about his money. Hattie walked back to me and crouched down. Her face was inches from mine. "They are coming for you," she said. "If they find out you are alive, they will finish the job. But if you are willing to fight, I can show you where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively." I looked at the woman who had saved my life. I looked at the fire burning in the stove, and for the first time since I woke up in the snow, I didn't feel cold anymore. "I am listening," I said. "Tell me everything." 3 days passed inside that wooden shell of a cabin. The storm outside had died down to a whisper, but the storm inside me was just beginning to rage. My frostbite was healing, leaving my skin raw and peeling, but the cold had done something permanent to my heart. I was not the same girl who walked into the snow wearing a festive sweater and hoping for a family reunion. That girl was soft. That girl wanted a mommy and daddy to love her. The woman sitting by the rusted stove eating canned beans was something else entirely. Something harder. Hattie did not baby me during those 72 hours. She treated me like a recruit in a war I did not know I was fighting. She taught me how to walk without making the floorboards creak. She showed me how to darken my hair with charcoal from the stove so I would not be recognized from a distance. "You are dead, Imani," she told me as she used a dull knife to saw off my long braids. "Dead girls do not leave footprints. Dead girls do not make noise. And most importantly, dead girls listen." On the third morning, I tried to stand up and leave. I told Hattie I needed to find a police station. I wanted to report them. I wanted Hunter in handcuffs by dinner time. I was running on adrenaline and righteous indignation. Hattie just laughed. It was a sharp barking sound that echoed off the damp walls. "You think the police will believe you?" she asked. "You have no proof. It is your word against a wealthy white man who plays golf with the district attorney. He will say you had a mental breakdown. He will say you ran off into the woods yourself because of the drugs he pumped into your system. They will lock you in a psych ward while he spends your insurance money on a new yacht." I slumped back against the wall, defeated. She was right. Hunter was the golden boy of Wall Street. I was just a college dropout who waited tables. But Hattie was not done. She reached into her rucksack and pulled out a crumpled stack of papers. These were her obsession. Old printouts, notes, scribbles on napkins. She laid them out on the dusty floor like a war map. "Look at the dates," she said, pointing to a column of numbers with a dirt-stained fingernail. "Hunter is not just a murderer, Imani. He is a thief. He has been running a Ponzi scheme at Vance Capital for 5 years. He takes money from new investors to pay off the old ones. It is the oldest trick in the book. But the market crashed last month. The stream of new money dried up. He has a $5 million hole in his ledger, and the federal auditors are scheduled to visit his firm next week." I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of the financial jargon. $5 million. The number rang in my head like a bell. That was the exact amount of the insurance policy he forced me to sign. The realization hit me harder than the freezing wind. It was not just greed, it was desperation. He did not kill me because he hated me. He did not kill me because I was an inconvenience. He killed me because I was his bailout package. I was just a line item on a spreadsheet to balance his books. My life was the price of his freedom. "He thinks he is a genius," Hattie said, her voice dripping with venom. "He thinks he can plug the hole with your blood money before anyone notices. If you go back now alive and breathing, he goes to prison for attempted murder, maybe for a few years. He will hire expensive lawyers and get out in 2. But if you stay dead for a little while longer, we can take everything. We can expose the fraud. We can strip him of every dime. We can make sure that when he finally goes to jail, he goes as a pauper, not a prince. I looked at the papers, and then I looked at the fire dying in the stove. I thought about my mother stepping over my body to get to the warmth of the cabin. I thought about my father holding me down while Hunter stripped my coat. Justice was not enough anymore. I did not just want them punished. I wanted them destroyed. I wanted them to feel the same cold terror I felt in that ravine. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. Short, choppy hair, hollow cheeks, eyes that looked like burnt coal. Imani the barista was gone. I turned to Hattie and nodded slowly. "How do we start?" I asked. Hattie smiled for the first time since I met her. It was a terrifying smile full of sharp teeth and bad intentions. "First we let them bury you," she said. "We go to Chicago. We watch them cry on television, and then we become the ghosts they are so afraid of. Pack your things, girl. We have a funeral to attend." The drive back to Chicago was a blur of gray highway and nervous energy. Hattie's old sedan rattled like it was coughing up a lung, but it got us there. We parked 3 blocks away from the cemetery in a neighborhood where people kept their blinds drawn. I pulled the heavy black veil down over my face. It was an antique thing Hattie had found at a thrift store, thick enough to hide my features, but sheer enough to see the world. Hattie wore an oversized trench coat and dark sunglasses. We looked like 2 grieving distant relatives, or maybe just 2 ghosts haunting the edges of the frame. We walked through the side gate, avoiding the main entrance where the press vans were parked. The cemetery was one of those manicured places where the grass is too green and the silence costs money. I saw them before I heard them. A sea of black umbrellas and designer coats gathered around a freshly dug plot. My parents had spared no expense for the optics. There were white lilies everywhere, massive arrangements that must have cost thousands of dollars. It made my stomach turn. They would not pay for my college tuition, claiming money was tight, but they dropped a fortune on flowers to bury an empty casket. My mother was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was clinging to my father, sobbing into a lace handkerchief. I could hear her wails from 50 yards away, behind the cover of a large oak tree. "My baby," she screamed. Why did God take my baby? It was chilling to watch. 2 days ago, she had stepped over my freezing body to get to the fireplace. She had complained about my boots dirtying her floor while I was dying. Now she was playing the role of the devastated matriarch perfectly. The cameras were flashing, capturing every tear. That was the point, was it not? If the grieving mother looks sad enough, no one asks to see the autopsy report. No one asks why the body was never recovered. Then Hunter stepped up to the podium. He looked dashing in a sharp black suit, his face solemn and composed. He did not cry. He played the strong, stoic protector. He spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying over the wind. He talked about how much I loved nature. He told the crowd that I died doing what I loved, hiking in the mountains. It was a lie so bold it almost sounded like truth. He talked about healing and moving forward. I knew exactly what moving forward meant to him. It meant cashing the $5 million check and erasing his debt. But it was not Hunter's lies that made my blood boil. It was Ebony. She stood next to the grave, looking bored, checking her phone behind her purse. When she looked up, the sunlight caught something around her neck. My breath hitched. She was wearing them. Grandma's pearls. The single strand of South Sea pearls that Grandma left specifically to me in her handwritten will. The ones Ebony had tried to steal for years, claiming they suited her complexion better. She was not just burying me, she was looting my corpse before the dirt even hit the ground. The rage hit me like a physical blow. I forgot about the plan. I forgot about being dead. I just wanted to rip those pearls off her neck. I took a step forward, stepping out from behind the tree. My hands balled into fists. I was going to scream. I was going to march down that hill and tell everyone right there that they were murderers. I wanted to see the fear in their eyes. A hand clamped down on my arm like a steel vise. Hattie yanked me back behind the rough bark of the oak tree. "Stop," she hissed. Her voice was low and hard. "Look at them, Imani. Look at the police officers standing by the gate. Look at the lawyers." I struggled against her grip, tears of frustration hot in my eyes. "They are stealing my life," I whispered. "She is wearing my necklace, Hattie." Hattie shook her head, her grip tightening. "If you go out there now, you are just a hysterical girl who got lost in the snow. They will spin it. Hunter will say you are crazy. He will say the cold damaged your brain or that you are on drugs. And then they will lock you away in a psych ward where no one can hear you scream." She turned my face toward her, forcing me to look into her relentless eyes. "You do not hunt a viper by stepping on its tail. You wait until it exposes its neck. Then you cut off the head." I looked at her, and then I looked back at the grave. Hunter was throwing a handful of dirt onto the coffin, a coffin that contained nothing but rocks to simulate the weight of a body. Hattie was right. Emotional outbursts were for victims. I was not a victim anymore. I was the executioner. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold cemetery air. I forced my hands to unclench. "Okay," I said. "Let them have their show. It is the last happy day they will ever have." We turned and walked away, leaving my old life buried in the ground. As we walked back to the car, I did not look back. I had a lot of work to do. And the first step was to become the ghost they were so afraid of. The cemetery was behind us, but the real digging was just beginning. Hattie drove us to the south side of the city, to a place called The Connection. It was a rundown internet cafe, tucked into the basement of a laundromat, the kind of place where the windows were taped over, and the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and ozone. It was perfect. No cameras, no questions, just rows of humming computers and a connection speed fast enough to bring down an empire. I pulled my hood up and sat at a terminal in the far corner. Hattie stood guard by the vending machine, her eyes scanning every person who walked through the door. I cracked my knuckles and looked at the glowing screen. My family thought they knew me. To them, I was just Imani, the failure, the girl who dropped out of college to wait tables and scrub floors. They thought the extent of my ambition was learning how to do acrylic nails at the local beauty school. They used to laugh about it at dinner parties, making jokes about how I was destined to spend my life touching other people's feet. What they did not know was that I never dropped out. I transferred to online night classes. I was not studying cosmetology. I was studying cybersecurity. While they were sleeping in their silk sheets, I was awake at 3 in the morning learning how to breach firewalls, encrypt data, and trace digital footprints. They thought I was helpless. They had no idea they had locked a hacker out of the house and given her a reason to break back in. I opened a command prompt. The black screen with its blinking green cursor felt like home. My target was the cloud server for Vance Capital, specifically Hunter's private executive account. A man like Hunter Vance does not keep his secrets in a filing cabinet. He keeps them in the cloud, protected by expensive software that he thinks is invincible. But Hunter has a fatal flaw: arrogance. He thinks he is the smartest person in every room. I bypassed the initial firewall in under 10 minutes. It was standard corporate security designed to keep out amateurs, not someone with a personal vendetta. Then came the password encryption. I paused, thinking like him. A man like Hunter would never use a random string of characters. He is too narcissistic. I tried the name of his yacht. Access denied. I tried his date of birth. Access denied. Then I remembered something he said at the cabin about how he was the king of his own world. I typed in Midas Touch 88. Access granted. The screen flooded with folders. I did not waste time looking at his stock portfolios or his client lists. I went straight to the folder marked Personal Correspondence. I filtered the search for my father's email address. The results loaded instantly, a long list of threads dating back 6 months. I clicked on the most recent one, dated 3 days before the trip to Aspen. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the subject line, Solution to the Debt. I opened it. The email was from Hunter to my father Desmond. It was short, brutal, and devoid of any humanity. It read, "Desmond, stop panicking. The insurance policy is active as of this morning. $5 million. Once the payout clears, I will wire the $500,000 directly to your bookie. Your knees are safe. You keep the house. We just need to get her to the cabin." I felt bile rise in my throat. I had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. $500,000. That was the price tag on my life. My father had not just gone along with Hunter's plan because he was weak. He had sold me to pay off a gambling debt. All those nights he came home late, claiming he was working, he was actually at the casino betting away our future. And when the loan sharks came calling, he threw his own daughter to the wolves to save his own skin. I clicked on the next email, a reply from my father. I prayed to see some hesitation, some resistance, but all it said was, "Are you sure it will look like an accident? I cannot go to jail, Hunter. Patricia is asking questions." There was no remorse, only fear of getting caught. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. I was done crying for them. I was looking at the anatomy of a murder written in black and white pixels. I kept digging. I found more. Emails between Hunter and a corrupt actuary discussing how to expedite the death certificate claim without a body. Messages to Ebony telling her to start looking at vacation homes in the south of France. They were already spending the money. They were carving up my corpse and feasting on it. I plugged in a flash drive Hattie had given me. I downloaded everything. Every email. Every bank transfer. Every damning word. The progress bar moved agonizingly slow, or maybe it was just my heart racing too fast. 90%, 95, done. I pulled the drive out and slipped it into my bra right next to my beating heart. I had the smoking gun. I had the motive. But Hattie had told me this was not enough. To truly destroy them, to strip them of everything, we needed one more thing. We needed the one document that Hunter had buried deeper than any email. We needed my grandmother's original will. I closed the browser and wiped the history. I stood up my legs, feeling steady and strong. I walked over to Hattie. She looked at my face and she knew. She did not ask what I found. She just handed me a bottle of water. "You got him?" she asked. I nodded, my voice cold as ice. "I got all of them. Hunter is paying off Dad's gambling debts. They are all in on it." Hattie nodded grimly. "Good. Now we go to the records office. It is time to find out what your grandmother really left you. Because I have a feeling $5 million is just the tip of the iceberg." We walked out of the internet cafe and back into the gray city afternoon. I touched the flash drive hidden against my skin. It felt heavy, loaded with the weight of their sins. They thought they had buried me in the snow. They were wrong. They had just planted a seed, and now the harvest was coming. The city records office was a tomb of forgotten secrets located in the basement of the municipal courthouse. It smelled of mildew dust and decaying paper. While the internet cafe had been my battlefield, this was Hattie's domain. She walked through the fluorescent-lit corridors, not like a homeless woman, but like the executive she used to be. She led me straight to the desk of an elderly archivist named Mr. Henderson. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes widened behind his thick glasses. He did not see the rags. He saw an old friend. He slid a key across the counter without asking a single question. We navigated the labyrinth of metal shelving units until we reached the section marked Estates and Trusts 2018. My grandmother had passed away 3 years ago, and that was when the timeline of my life had split from reality. Hattie stood guard at the end of the aisle while I pulled the heavy cardboard box labeled with my family name. My hands were trembling, not from cold this time, but from the terrifying anticipation of truth. I opened the box. Inside were stacks of legal documents, deeds and tax filings. I dug past the mundane paperwork until I hit the bottom. There, sealed in a thick manila envelope, was the last will and testament of Rosewood Vance. The seal had been broken, likely by my father years ago. I pulled out the document. The paper felt heavy and expensive, the kind that carries the weight of a legacy. I began to read, and the air left my lungs. My grandmother did not leave the money to the family. She did not leave it to my father, who she always said had a hole in his hand where money fell through. She certainly did not leave it to Ebony. The bold text in Article 4 was unmistakable. It read, "I hereby bequeath my entire estate, including the liquid assets of $10 million, and the copyright to my literary works, solely to my granddaughter, Imani Vance." $10 million. I had to lean against the metal shelf to keep from collapsing. I was not the poor relation. I was not the burden. I had been a multimillionaire since the day I turned 18. But then I saw the next document stapled to the back of the will. It was a petition for conservatorship filed by Desmond and Patricia Vance. I read the attached medical affidavit. It was signed by a doctor I had never met. It claimed that I, Imani Vance, suffered from severe early-onset schizophrenia and drug dependency, rendering me unfit to manage my own finances. It stated that for my own protection, control of the trust should be granted to my parents until I reached the age of 25 or until my death. They had stolen my life with a pen stroke. All those times they called me unstable, all those times they dismissed my feelings, they were laying the groundwork for this legal fiction. They had painted me as crazy so they could rob me blind. And now that I was approaching 25, the deadline for their control was running out. That was why they needed the trip to Aspen. That was why they needed the blizzard. They could not let me reach the age where the money became mine legally. Hattie walked up beside me and looked at the papers. She traced the signature on the guardianship papers. "We have them," she whispered. "This proves the motive. They did not just want the insurance money. They needed to stop you from claiming the principal inheritance." I folded the papers, my grip tightening until my knuckles turned white. "So we take this to the police," I said. "We prove I am sane. We prove the will is valid. I get my money and they go to jail for fraud." Hattie shook her head slowly, her expression grim. "It is not that simple, Imani. If you walk into a police station right now and prove you are alive, the conservatorship ends. You get the money, yes, but they will claim the conservatorship was filed in good faith. They will say they truly believed you were sick. They will hire the best defense attorneys in Chicago. They might lose the money, but they will stay free. They will keep their house, their reputation, and their freedom. Is that enough for you?" I looked at the forged medical report that called me a drug addict. I thought about the cold snow against my skin. "No," I said. "I want them to have nothing." "Then we have to go for the throat," Hattie said. "In the legal world, it is called the Slayer Rule. It is a common law doctrine that prohibits a murderer from inheriting property from the person they killed. But I am not dead," I argued. "Exactly," Hattie replied. "But they tried to kill you to secure the inheritance. If we can prove that the attempt on your life was directly linked to this money, the court does not just give you the cash. The court strips them of everything they have used the trust to buy over the last 3 years. Every car, every vacation, the house in the Hamptons, the penthouse, it all becomes proceeds of a crime. We do not just want to take back what is yours. We want to invoke the Slayer Rule to leave them destitute." I understood then. The goal was not just survival, it was total annihilation. I looked at the date on the will one last time. My grandmother had loved me. She had tried to protect me. Now I would use her gift to burn their world to the ground. "We need to make sure they believe I am dead for exactly 48 more hours," I said, sliding the documents into my bag. "The charity gala is in 2 days. Hunter is going to try to transfer the trust funds into his personal offshore account during the event, claiming he is donating it to the foundation in my memory." Hattie grinned, and it was the sharpest thing I had ever seen. "And when he tries to make that transfer," she said, "we will be there to catch his hand in the cookie jar. Come on, girl. We have to get you a dress. You cannot come back from the dead wearing rags." The morning after the funeral, the Vance family estate was quiet, wrapped in the comfortable silence of wealth and secrets. From where I sat in a rental car parked down the street, watching through a pair of high-powered binoculars, the house looked like a fortress. But I knew that inside the walls were made of paper. My family was likely celebrating. They thought the hard part was over. They had cried on cue, they had buried the empty casket, and now they were just waiting for the insurance wire transfer to clear. Inside the house, as I later learned from the hidden listening devices Hattie had planted in the flower arrangements, sent to the funeral breakfast was being served. Ebony was sitting at the marble island in the kitchen nursing a mimosa. She was scrolling through social media reading the comments on her tribute post to me. She was feeding on the sympathy of strangers liking comments that called her brave and strong. My mother Patricia was arranging white lilies in a crystal vase humming a soft tune. It was a scene of domestic bliss built on the foundation of my murder. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. It was a courier service, a priority overnight delivery addressed to Ebony Vance. I watched the delivery driver hand the package to the housekeeper through the gate. It was a plain cardboard box wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Just a simple white label with Ebony's name typed in bold block letters. Ebony took the package from the housekeeper with a greedy smile. She loved gifts. She probably assumed it was a condolence present from one of Hunter's wealthy business partners, perhaps a box of gourmet chocolates or a spa voucher. She set the box down on the kitchen island, pushing aside her mimosa. "I wonder who this is from," she said, her voice bright and curious. "Maybe it is from the senator. He said he wanted to send something special." Hunter walked into the kitchen at that moment, pouring himself a cup of black coffee. His hand was steady. He looked relaxed, the tension of the last few days finally leaving his shoulders. "Open it up," he said casually. "Let us see who we need to write a thank you note to." Ebony grabbed a steak knife from the counter and sliced through the tape. She opened the flaps of the box. She reached inside expecting tissue paper and luxury goods. Instead, her fingers brushed against rough, damp wool. She froze. The smile dropped from her face like a shattered plate. She pulled her hand back, as if she had touched a hot stove. A smell wafted out of the box, filling the pristine kitchen. It was not the smell of death. It was worse. It was the smell of life. It was a distinct blend of vanilla sandalwood and cheap drugstore shampoo. It was my scent. The scent I had worn every day for 5 years. "What is it?" my mother asked, turning from her flowers. "Ebony, what is wrong?" Ebony did not answer. She reached into the box again, her hands shaking violently, and pulled out the object. It unfolded in her hands, heavy and familiar. It was a camel-colored wool coat. It was old, the fabric pilled at the elbows with a missing button on the left cuff. It was the coat I had worn to the cabin, the coat Hunter had stripped off my freezing body and tossed into the snowdrift before driving away. Hattie had found it near the ravine, stiff with ice, and we had spent all night cleaning it, preparing it for this moment. Ebony screamed. It was a primal, terrified sound that echoed off the high ceilings. She threw the coat across the room as if it were covered in spiders. It landed in a heap on the floor, looking like a dead body. "It is hers!" Ebony shrieked, backing away until she hit the refrigerator. "It is Imani's coat. I saw him take it off her. I saw him leave it in the snow. Why is it here? How is it here?" Hunter dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, sending hot liquid splashing onto his expensive Italian loafers. He stared at the coat, his face draining of color. For the first time, the mask of the arrogant Wall Street shark slipped. He looked like a scared child. He walked over to the coat, slowly stepping over the broken ceramics. He knelt down and touched it. It was cold. "This is impossible," he whispered. I left this miles away from the main road. The snow should have buried it." He picked it up, searching the pockets. He turned it inside out, looking for a note, a threat, anything to explain how this object had traveled from a ravine in Aspen to a kitchen in Chicago. But there was nothing. No paper, no message. Just the overwhelming scent of vanilla and the terrifying reality of its presence. "Someone is messing with us," my mother cried, clutching her chest. Is it a blackmailer? Did someone see you, Hunter? Oh my God, did someone see you do it? Shut up, Patricia Hunter snapped, but his voice lacked its usual authority. It wavered. He stood up, clutching the coat in his fist. It is just a prank. Some hiker probably found it and saw the missing person flyers. They mailed it back. That is all. To our home address, Ebony yelled, her eyes wide and manic. The flyers only had the police station number, Hunter. How did they get our address? And why does it smell like her? It smells like she just took it off. Hunter did not have an answer. He threw the coat into the trash compactor and slammed the door shut, as if he could crush the memory of what he had done. He turned to his wife and mother-in-law, trying to regain control. We are not going to panic, he said, but I could see his hands trembling at his sides. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, abandoning the coffee. It is 10 a.m., and he was already needing a drink to steady his nerves. It is a coincidence, Hunter insisted, taking a large gulp of the amber liquid. Just a sick coincidence. Imani is dead. I saw her body stop moving. Nobody survives a night in that temperature. Nobody. He was trying to convince them, but mostly he was trying to convince himself. Outside in the car, I lowered the binoculars and smiled. The seed was planted. They were not dealing with a legal threat yet. They were dealing with a haunting. And ghosts are much harder to kill than people. I signaled Hattie to start the engine. We had delivered the first message. Now it was time to turn up the heat. Hunter Vance thought he was untouchable in his ivory tower. He was about to learn that even the highest towers can be brought down by the ghosts living in the basement. That evening, I sat in the darkness of a cheap motel room a few miles away from the estate, watching the live feed from the hidden cameras on my laptop screen. Hattie sat beside me eating takeout, but her eyes were glued to the monitor. We were about to ruin dinner. Inside the Vance mansion, the family was gathered around the mahogany dining table. The atmosphere was brittle enough to snap. My mother, Patricia, looked like a ghost herself. Her skin was pale, and her hands shook as she tried to cut her steak. She kept glancing at the empty chair where I used to sit during holidays before they exiled me to the kitchen. Hunter sat at the head of the table, pouring himself another glass of deep red wine. He had been drinking steadily since the coat appeared that morning. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were bloodshot. He was trying to maintain the facade of the patriarch, but the cracks were showing. Ebony was picking at her food, checking her phone every 30 seconds, likely deleting negative comments on her social media. My father, Desmond, just stared at his plate, looking like a man waiting for the executioner. They were all terrified, and they had every right to be. I opened the terminal on my laptop. I had compromised their smart home system hours ago. It was embarrassingly easy. Hunter had connected everything to a single hub for convenience: lights, security, sound system, and climate control. He thought he was living in the future, but he had just given me the keys to his house. I typed in a command and hit enter. In the dining room, the silence was broken not by a scream, but by a melody. Softly at first, then swelling in volume, a song began to play through the high-fidelity speakers embedded in the ceiling. It was "His Eye is on the Sparrow." It was the song I had sung as a solo in the church choir when I was 12 years old. The specific recording playing now was from an old family video, a digital file I had found on their server. My young, innocent voice filled the room, echoing off the cold walls. I watched their reactions. Patricia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china plate. She looked up at the ceiling, her eyes wide with horror. Ebony froze her fork halfway to her mouth. Desmond looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Hunter slammed his wine glass down, spilling red liquid onto the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "Turn it off," Hunter barked. "Who turned that on?" "Alexa, stop." But the digital assistant did not obey. My voice kept singing, rising to the crescendo. I typed another command. The crystal chandelier above the table began to flicker. It was not a random glitch. It was precise. Short flash, long flash. "What is happening?" Ebony cried, pushing her chair back. "The lights are going crazy." Hunter, make it stop. Patricia stood up slowly, her hands clutching the pearl necklace she had stolen from me. She is here, she whispered. Do you not see it? The lights. It is a message. I tapped the rhythm on my keyboard, matching the pulses in the dining room. Dash dash dot dot. It was Morse code. I had taught it to my father when I was a kid during a summer we spent camping, before the gambling took his soul. I saw recognition dawn on Desmond's face. He stared at the light, reading the pulses. Murreer. My father gasped, covering his mouth with his hand. Murderer, he whispered. It spells murderer. Patricia let out a wail that sounded more like an animal than a human. It is her, she screamed. It is Imani. She knows what we did. We left her in the snow. We killed my baby, and now she is haunting us. We have to go to the church. We have to confess. Shut up, Hunter roared. He stood up, knocking his heavy chair over. There is no such thing as ghosts, Patricia. It is a glitch. It is a hacker. No, Patricia sobbed, stepping away from the table. We have to tell the truth. I cannot live like this. The coat, the song. She is watching us, Hunter. She is going to drag us to hell. I am going to the police. I am going to tell them everything. She turned toward the door. Hunter moved faster than I thought possible for a man who had consumed half a bottle of whiskey. He lunged across the room and grabbed my mother by the arm. He spun her around, and without a second of hesitation, he slapped her across the face. The sound was sickeningly loud, a sharp crack that silenced the song and the flickering lights instantly. My mother crumbled to the floor, holding her cheek, looking up at him in shock. Desmond stood up, but he did not move to help her. He just stood there, useless and cowardly as always. Ebony screamed and covered her mouth. You will do no such thing, Hunter hissed, standing over my mother like a tyrant. You will not go to the police. You will not go to the priest. You will sit down and eat your dinner. Do you understand me? He looked around the room, his eyes wild and dangerous. There is no ghost. There is only $5 million coming into our account in 48 hours. Anyone who messes that up will answer to me. And trust me, freezing to death will look like a mercy compared to what I will do to you. My mother wept quietly on the floor, a broken woman realizing she had traded her daughter for a monster. The family was fractured. Hunter had shown his true face. He was not the savior. He was the jailer. And I had it all on tape. I closed the laptop, feeling a cold satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. They were turning on each other. Now it was time to introduce them to the rest of the world. While my mother was weeping on the dining room floor, believing she was being haunted by a ghost, I was busy ensuring that Hunter had real-world demons to fight. Hattie and I had relocated to a 24-hour workspace in downtown Chicago, just a few blocks from the financial district. From here, I could look up at the steel and glass tower, where Vance Capital occupied the top 3 floors. It was a fortress of wealth built on lies and stolen pension funds. Hunter thought he was untouchable up there in the clouds. He thought he controlled the narrative. He was about to learn that gravity is the only law that truly matters on Wall Street. I sat at a sleek desk with my laptop open. On the screen was the private email address of Preston Sterling. Sterling was Hunter's biggest rival, a ruthless hedge fund manager who had been trying to acquire Vance Capital for years. Hunter hated him. He had once bragged at a family barbecue that he would rather burn his company to the ground than let Sterling see his books. That was exactly what I was counting on. I attached a single file to the email. It was not the entire database I had stolen. It was just enough to whet the appetite. It was a spreadsheet showing the discrepancies in the client accounts over the last quarter, specifically the $5 million hole that Hunter was desperately trying to plug with my life insurance money. I typed a simple subject line. The math does not add up. I hit send. I leaned back in my chair and watched the building across the street. It took exactly 14 minutes. I imagined Sterling opening the email on his phone, perhaps while having his morning coffee. I imagined the slow smile spreading across his face as he realized he finally had the smoking gun to destroy his enemy. Sterling did not call the police. That is not how these men operate. He called his friends at the Wall Street Journal. He called the Securities and Exchange Commission. He started the whispers that turn into avalanches. By noon, the first domino fell. I pulled up the live stock ticker for Vance Capital on my screen. It started with a small dip, a 3% drop, as rumors began to circulate on the trading floor. Then, a financial blog leaked a redacted version of the spreadsheet I had sent. The headline was brutal. Is Vance Capital the next Enron? The line on the graph plummeted. It was a vertical red streak that represented millions of dollars evaporating in seconds. The trading volumes spiked as investors scrambled to dump their shares. I watched the chaos unfold with a cold, detached satisfaction. This was the money Hunter had killed for. This was the reputation he had protected by stripping me naked in a blizzard. Now it was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Inside the penthouse office on the 40th floor, Hunter was living a nightmare. I could not see him, but I could hear him. I had hacked into the sophisticated intercom system on his desk phone earlier that morning. The audio feed was crystal clear. "Get me legal on the phone now," Hunter screamed. His voice was raw with panic. "Why is the stock down 30 points? Who leaked this?" I heard the sound of glass shattering. He had likely thrown his coffee mug or perhaps a bottle of expensive scotch against the wall. His assistant was sobbing in the background, trying to apologize for things that were not her fault. "Mr. Vance, the SEC is online." "One," the assistant stammered. "They are announcing a formal audit." Hunter let out a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. It was the sound of a wounded animal cornered in a trap. "Hang up on them," he yelled. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them it is a clerical error. Get Sterling on the phone. I know he is behind this." I listened as he paced the room, his heavy footsteps thudding against the carpet. He was breathing hard, hyperventilating. His empire was crumbling, and he knew it. But a man like Hunter Vance does not accept defeat. He looks for someone to blame. He looks for a shield. I heard the beep of him dialing a number on his private line. I checked the call log on my screen. He was calling my father. Desmond picked up on the second ring. "Hello." His voice was shaking. He must have seen the news. "You old fool," Hunter hissed into the phone. His tone was venomous, stripped of all the fake politeness he usually used with his in-laws. "Did you talk to anyone? Did you tell anyone about the insurance policy?" "No, Hunter. I swear," Desmond stuttered. "I have not said a word. Patricia is a mess, but she has not left the house. What is happening? The news says you are stealing money." "Shut up," Hunter snapped. "Listen to me very carefully, Desmond. If this ship goes down, I am not going down alone. You signed the conservatorship papers. You signed the loan agreements for the house. On paper, you are a silent partner in the firm." There was a long, terrified silence on the other end of the line. "What are you saying, Hunter?" my father whispered. "I am saying that if the feds come knocking, I am going to tell them that I was manipulated by my gambling addict father-in-law." Hunter said, his voice deadly calm. "I will tell them you needed money to pay off the mob, so you pressured me to cook the books. I will tell them the insurance fraud was your idea. I have the emails, Desmond. I can make them look however I want." "You would not dare!" Desmond cried. "We are family." "Family is a liability," Hunter replied, cold as ice. "You have until the gala tomorrow night to keep your wife quiet and your mouth shut. If I go to prison, Desmond, you are coming with me, and you will not survive a week in there." Hunter slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. I sat in the workspace staring at the audio waveform on my screen. He had just handed me another weapon. He had turned on his strongest ally. My father was a coward, but even a coward fights back when he is cornered. Hunter had just made a fatal mistake. He thought he could bully everyone into submission. He did not realize that by threatening my father, he had just severed the last thread holding the family loyalty together. I saved the recording and closed the laptop. Hattie looked at me over the top of her newspaper. "He is cracking," she observed. "He is not just cracking," I said, standing up and pulling on my coat. "He is exploding. And tomorrow night at the gala, we are going to light the fuse. Let us go, Hattie. I have a dress to buy." The sun had barely set, but the neon lights of the motel sign were already buzzing with an angry electric hum. Hattie and I were holed up in room 204, a cramped space that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. We were in the shadow of the train tracks, a part of Chicago where the police sirens were just background noise. I was pacing the worn carpet, clutching my backpack. Inside were the hard drive and the original will, the only two things keeping me alive. Hattie was standing by the window, peering through a crack in the yellowed blinds. She had been standing there for an hour, as still as a statue. She knew the rhythm of the street better than anyone. She knew which cars belonged to the drug dealers on the corner and which ones belonged to the working girls. Suddenly her posture stiffened. She stepped back from the window, her face grim. "We are burning," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Grab your coat, now." I moved to the window to look. A sleek black SUV was idling at the curb directly below us. It looked out of place among the rusted sedans and pickup trucks. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a gray wool coat that cost more than this entire building. He did not look like a cop. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, scanning the second-floor windows with cold, dead eyes. He walked straight toward the motel stairs, bypassing the front office. He did not need a keycard. He had a purpose. "Is that the police?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hattie shook her head. "No, that is a cleaner. Graves, ex-military contractor. I used to see his name on the payroll for security consulting back at Vance Capital. Hunter calls him when he wants a problem to disappear without a paper trail." We heard heavy footsteps on the metal stairs outside. Clang, clang, clang. He was coming up, fast. Hattie shoved me toward the bathroom. "Not the door," she hissed. The window. The bathroom window opened onto a rusted fire escape that looked like it hadn't been inspected since the 80s. Hattie kicked the screen out with her boot. We climbed out into the freezing night air just as the door to our room exploded inward. There was no shout, no FBI, open up. Just the splintering of wood and the silence of a professional killer. We scrambled down the fire escape, the metal groaning under our weight. I looked up. Graves was already at the window. He looked down at us, his face impassive. He did not pull a gun. He knew better than to shoot in the open. He swung his legs over the sill and began to descend, moving faster than us, closing the gap with terrifying efficiency. We hit the alleyway, our boots splashing in freezing puddles. "Run," Hattie ordered. We sprinted through the maze of dumpsters and discarded furniture. The alley was a dead end, blocked by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Panic clawed at my throat. We were trapped. I spun around. Graves dropped to the pavement 10 feet away from us. He straightened his coat and adjusted his cuffs. He looked at me like I was a spreadsheet error he was about to delete. "Imani Vance," he said, his voice smooth and flat. "Your brother-in-law is very disappointed in you. It is time to go home." He reached into his coat. I expected a gun, but he pulled out a syringe. He wanted to make it look like an overdose. Another tragic accident for the Vance family. Hattie stepped in front of me. She looked small and frail next to him, a homeless woman in a trench coat facing down a monster. But she was smiling. It was a dangerous, jagged smile. "You took a wrong turn, son," Hattie said. "This is not Wall Street," Graves sneered. "Move aside, old woman." Hattie put 2 fingers to her mouth and let out a sharp, piercing whistle. Suddenly, the pile of cardboard boxes next to Graves exploded. 2 massive pit bulls erupted from the trash, snarling and snapping. They were wild, hungry, and mean, the guardians of the junkyard next door. Hattie had been feeding them her leftover sandwiches for 3 days, earning their loyalty. Graves stumbled back, his professional composure shattering as 80 pounds of muscle slammed into his chest. He kicked out, catching one dog in the ribs, but the other clamped its jaws onto the sleeve of his expensive coat, dragging him down. "Go!" Hattie screamed, grabbing my arm. She pulled me toward a section of the fence that looked solid but was actually cut at the bottom, a homeless shortcut she knew from her days on the street. We scrambled through the opening, tearing our clothes on the wire. We burst out onto the main street, right next to where Hattie had parked her beat-up sedan. We dove inside. Hattie jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered. "Come on," I begged. "Start." The engine roared to life just as a gunshot rang out. Thwip! The back window shattered. Graves had thrown off the dogs and was firing at us through the fence, abandoning all subtlety. Hattie slammed her foot on the gas. The car screeched away from the curb, merging into the evening traffic just as another bullet pinged off the bumper. I looked back, watching Graves shrink in the distance. He was standing on the sidewalk, dialing his phone. "He is calling Hunter," I whispered, shaking uncontrollably. "Let him call Hattie," said, her eyes fixed on the road. "Now Hunter knows we are not just running, we are fighting, and he just used his last card. He has no more moves, Imani. Tomorrow night we walk into that gala, and we end this." I touched the hard drive in my bag. The fear was still there, but it was hardening into something else. Resolve. Hunter had tried to kill me twice now. There would not be a third time. Tomorrow the prey would become the predator. The garage was little more than a corrugated tin shack hidden behind an abandoned auto body shop on the outskirts of the city. Hattie called it her safe house, but it looked more like a graveyard for rusted metal. We pulled the car in and killed the headlights. The darkness swallowed us instantly. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant wail of sirens that were thankfully moving away from us. My hands were still shaking from the encounter with the hitman, but Hattie was already moving. She did not waste time processing fear. She processed solutions. She walked over to a tarp in the corner and pulled it back, revealing the old battered sedan she had been driving the night she found me. The windshield was cracked and the front bumper was hanging off by a wire, but right there, mounted on the dashboard, was a small black device. The dash cam. It was an older model, the kind that looks like a cheap plastic toy, but Hattie treated it like the Hope Diamond. She popped the SD card out with a click that sounded incredibly loud in the silence. We sat on a stack of old tires in the corner, huddled around my laptop. The blue light of the screen illuminated our faces, making Hattie look like a witch casting a spell, and me like a ghost waiting to be summoned. I inserted the card. The laptop words struggling to read the outdated format. A folder appeared titled December 24th, Christmas Eve, the night I died. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. I knew what was on this card, but knowing it and seeing it were two different things. Hattie put a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm, grounding. "You need to see this, Imani," she said softly. "You need to know exactly what we are fighting." I clicked the file. The video player opened. The footage was grainy and dark, illuminated only by the headlights of Hattie's car, cutting through the white wall of the blizzard. I watched the digital timestamp count up. The car was stationary. Hattie had parked it just off the logging road, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees. For the first few minutes, there was nothing but the swirling snow and the howling wind. It looked like static on an old television. Then lights appeared in the distance, red taillights. I stopped breathing. It was Hunter's Range Rover. It pulled into the frame and stopped about 20 yards away. The footage was blurry, but the silhouette of the vehicle was unmistakable. Two figures got out. I watched myself being dragged from the back seat. I looked limp, lifeless, a rag doll being discarded. Hattie reached over and turned the volume up to the maximum. The audio was distorted by the wind, but the camera's microphone was high quality, intended to capture license plates and conversations during traffic stops. The wind roared like a beast on the recording. Then a voice cut through the noise. It was sharp, clear, and terrified. It was my father. "She is not moving, Hunter. Oh God, she is not moving." Then came the voice that has haunted my nightmares for the last week. Hunter's voice. It was calm. It was the voice of a man discussing a stock trade, not a murder. "Stop whining, Desmond. It is the sedative. It slows the heart rate." I watched on the screen as Hunter shoved my body toward the edge of the ravine. I saw my father hesitate, holding my coat. I saw Hunter snatch it away and throw it into the snow. The visual was dark, but the audio was terrifyingly intimate. It felt like he was in the garage with us, whispering directly into my ear. "Check her breath," Hunter commanded on the tape. I saw my father lean down over my prone form. There was a pause, a long, agonizing silence where the only sound was the wind. I think I feel something, Desmond stammered. It is faint. Hunter, maybe we should. Is she dead? Hunter interrupted, his voice snapping like a whip. Desmond did not answer immediately. On the screen, I saw him look back at the warm car, then down at me. She is gone, he lied. Or maybe he believed it. Or maybe he just wanted it to be over. Good, Hunter said. Then throw her down. I watched my own body tumble over the edge and disappear into the darkness. I heard the crunch of the snow. I heard the car doors slam. I heard the engine roar as they drove away, leaving me to freeze. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there in the cold garage, and for a moment I felt nothing. I was numb. Then the tears came. They were not the hot tears of panic or the silent tears of grief. These were cold tears. They slid down my face like melting ice. I was crying for the girl in the video. I was crying for the daughter who had looked up at her father and begged for help only to be thrown away like garbage. I was crying because I finally understood that they never loved me. Not even a little bit. I was just an obstacle to their wealth. Hattie did not tell me to stop crying. She handed me a rag to wipe my face. We got him, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That is conspiracy to commit murder. That is insurance fraud. That is a life sentence for both of them. I wiped my face. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The girl who wanted her daddy's approval died in that ravine. The woman sitting in this garage was the executioner. Make 3 copies, I said, my voice steady and strong. 1 on the cloud, 1 on this drive, and 1 sent to a secure server in Switzerland. I stood up and smoothed down my clothes. I looked at the dark screen where my murder had just played out. Hunter wanted to know if I was dead, I said, staring at my reflection in the glass. Tomorrow night, I'm going to walk onto that stage and give him the answer. I picked up the flash drive. It felt heavy in my hand. It was not just data. It was a weapon. And I was about to pull the trigger. We have the will. We have the video. We have everything. Hattie kicked the tire stack over and grabbed her keys. Then let us go get you that dress, she said. If you are going to rise from the dead, you might as well look like a queen when you do it. We walked out of the garage and into the night. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. All that was left was the mission. Hunter Vance had 48 hours to enjoy his freedom. I was going to make sure he spent the rest of his life remembering the sound of my voice. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The next morning broke with a sky the color of bruised iron matching the mood inside our cramped safe house. Today was the day. The gala was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the Drake Hotel, one of the most historic and opulent venues in Chicago. Hunter had rented the Gold Coast Ballroom, a space dripping with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes, to announce the launch of the Imani Vance Memorial Foundation. It was the perfect stage for his performance as the grieving brother-in-law, and it was the perfect stage for his execution. While Hattie was out securing the final piece of our wardrobe, I sat at the laptop preparing the bait. Hunter was currently drowning. His stock had tanked 40% in 24 hours. The SEC had announced a formal inquiry. His investors were calling for his head. He needed a miracle, and he needed it immediately. I was about to give him one. I drafted an email from a secure encrypted server routed through Zurich. I created a fictional entity called the Aurora Consortium, a private equity group known for high-stakes philanthropy. The email was addressed directly to Hunter's personal inbox. It stated that the Aurora Consortium had been moved by the tragic story of Imani Vance and wished to make a substantial contribution to her memorial foundation. The amount I typed into the subject line was $10 million. I hit send and switched immediately to the live feed from Hunter's home office. He was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. He looked like a man on the brink of a total psychotic break. His tie was undone, his hair was disheveled, and there was a half-empty bottle of scotch sitting next to a stack of legal notices. When his computer chimed, he didn't even look up at first. He probably thought it was another lawsuit or another cancellation. Slowly, he reached out and clicked the mouse. I watched his face closely. He squinted at the screen. Then his eyes widened. He sat up straight, knocking his chair back. He leaned in, reading the email once, twice, 3 times. I saw a transformation happen in real time. The color returned to his cheeks. The slump in his shoulders vanished. A greedy, predatory grin spread across his face. $10 million, he whispered. I could hear him through the bug in his lamp. It is a bailout. It is a total bailout. He grabbed his phone and dialed his publicist. His voice was manic, vibrating with renewed energy. Sarah, listen to me, he barked. I just got a commitment for a $10 million donation to the foundation. Yes, tonight. The donor wants to present it live at the gala. It is a surprise. I need you to double the press list. Get CNN. Get the Financial Times. Get everyone. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. I do not care if it is last minute, he shouted. Tell them this donation proves Vance Capital is solvent. Tell the SEC auditors to come. Invite them personally. I want them to see me accepting a check that clears all our debts. This is the turnaround, Sarah. We are going to be heroes. I took off my headphones and leaned back. He had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. He was not just inviting the media to witness his generosity. He was inviting the federal government to witness a crime. By inviting the SEC auditors, he was ensuring that when the truth came out, the people with the power to arrest him would be standing in the front row. Hattie walked in the door carrying a long garment bag. She looked at my face and smiled. He took it, she asked. He took it, I replied. He thinks a mysterious benefactor is coming to save his empire. He has invited the entire city to watch. Hattie unzipped the bag. Inside was a dress that looked like it had been woven from blood and starlight. It was a deep crimson-red silk floor-length with a sharp plunging neckline. It was not a dress for a shy girl. It was a dress for a woman who intends to burn a room down. You cannot walk in there looking like a victim, Hattie said, hanging the dress on the doorframe. You need to look like the money he killed for. You need to look like $10 million walking on 2 legs. I ran my hand over the silk. It felt cool and dangerous. For the last 5 years I had worn hand-me-downs and uniforms. I had made myself small to avoid my mother's criticism and my sister's jealousy. Tonight I would take up all the space in the room. We have 6 hours, I said, turning back to the computer to finalize the transfer documents. These documents were real, but they didn't transfer money from the Aurora Consortium to Hunter. They were legal affidavits I had prepared authorizing the immediate freezing of all assets upon proof of fraud. Hunter spent the rest of the afternoon in a frenzy. I watched him berate the caterers demanding better champagne. I watched him scream at Ebony to wear the pearls because they looked sympathetic. I watched him rehearse his acceptance speech in the mirror, practicing his humble face. He was so convinced of his own genius that he didn't realize he was standing on a trapdoor. At 6 o'clock I showered and scrubbed the last of the grease and grime from my skin. Hattie helped me into the dress. It fit like a second skin. I put on heels that added 3 inches to my height. I applied dark, sharp eyeliner and a red lipstick that matched the dress perfectly. Hattie stood back and looked at me. Her eyes were misty. They are not going to know what hit them, she said softly. I looked in the cracked mirror of the motel room. The girl who froze in the snow was gone. The woman staring back was cold, beautiful, and ready to kill. Let us go, I said. My brother-in-law is waiting for his check. I would hate to be late for his funeral. The Gold Coast ballroom at the Drake Hotel smelled of lilies and money. It was a scent I knew well by now, the perfume of expensive lies. From the shadows of the foyer I watched the guests arrive. They were the elite of Chicago, men in bespoke tuxedos and women in black couture gowns, their necks dripping with diamonds. They had come to mourn the tragic death of Imani Vance, but mostly they had come because Hunter had promised a spectacle. He had promised that tonight Vance Capital would rise from the ashes. Inside the room was bathed in amber light. A massive projection of my face, a photo taken from my high school graduation, hovered over the stage. It was surreal to see myself smiling down at the people who had erased me. In the center of the room, my family held court. They were putting on a masterclass in deception. My mother Patricia sat at the front table dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked frail, a broken woman, but I knew she had spent 3 hours in hair and makeup to achieve that perfect look of tragic beauty. Ebony sat next to her wearing a black dress that was cut too low for a memorial, clutching my grandmother's pearls like a talisman. She was scanning the room not for sympathy, but for photographers. And then there was Hunter. He stood at the podium, bathed in the spotlight, looking every inch the grieving hero. He held a microphone in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He looked tired, but it was a calculated exhaustion. He wanted them to see the weight of the burden he was carrying. "Thank you all for coming." Hunter's voice boomed through the speakers, rich and tremulous. "We are here tonight to honor a beautiful soul. Imani was not just my sister-in-law. She was the heart of this family. She was fragile, yes, and she struggled with her own demons, but she loved deeply." I listened from behind the heavy oak doors, my blood turning to ice. He was doing it again. Even in death, he was painting me as the broken one, the unstable girl who wandered into the snow because she was sick. He was rewriting my history to justify his crime. I looked at Hattie, who was standing beside me, in a sharp black suit, looking like my personal security detail. She nodded once. It was time. On stage, Hunter shifted gears. His voice grew stronger, more businesslike. But Imani would not want us to dwell in sorrow. She would want us to build. That is why we are launching this foundation today. And I am humbled to announce that we have a surprise. A generous partner, the Aurora Consortium, has pledged a historic donation to ensure Imani's legacy lives on forever. A murmur went through the crowd. The reporters raised their cameras. The SEC auditors in the back row crossed their arms, waiting to see the money. Hunter checked his watch. He was expecting a representative from the consortium. He was expecting a check. What he got was me. I signaled the doorman. He threw the double doors open with a dramatic flourish. The sound of the heavy wood hitting the stops echoed through the ballroom. Heads turned. At first, there was just confusion. The light from the hallway spilled into the dim room, silhouetting my figure. I stepped forward out of the glare and into the amber glow of the chandeliers. I was not wearing black. I was wearing red. The silk dress flowed around me like liquid fire, a stark, violent contrast to the sea of mourning clothes. My hair was short and sharp. My lips were painted crimson. I did not look like a ghost. I looked like a heart beating in the center of a grave. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a physical thing, sucking the air out of the space. The clinking of silverware stopped. The whispers died. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. I began to walk down the center aisle. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was like a metronome counting down the seconds of Hunter's life. Click, click, click. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide with shock. Some of them recognized me from the photo on the screen, but they could not reconcile the smiling, soft girl in the picture with the woman walking toward the stage. They looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I saw the moment my mother saw me. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a crash. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her face went gray, the makeup unable to hide the terror draining the blood from her skin. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She just pointed her finger, trembling violently. Ebony grabbed the tablecloth, her knuckles white. She looked like she was going to be sick. She stared at the pearls around her own neck, then at me as if she expected me to rip them off her throat with my mind. But it was Hunter's reaction that I savored the most. He was mid-sentence, about to introduce the donor. The words died in his throat. He dropped the glass of water. It hit the podium and shattered, the sound amplified by the microphone like a gunshot. Shards of glass glittered in the spotlight. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. He blinked once, twice, trying to clear the hallucination. He looked at the SEC auditors, then at the cameras, then at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to figure out if this was a prank, a double, or a nightmare. I did not stop. I walked straight up the stairs to the stage. I stood 5 feet away from him. I could smell his sweat. It smelled of fear and scotch. I reached out and took the microphone from his frozen hand. He didn't fight me. He was paralyzed. I turned to the crowd. The blinding flash of 100 cameras erupted at once, capturing the resurrection of Imani Vance. I looked directly into the lens of the main television camera, transmitting live to the world. Hunter said I was fragile. I said my voice steady and cold, filling the cavernous room. He said I wandered into the snow. But I think we should let the evidence speak for itself. Do not you agree, Hunter? I pointed the remote control at the screen behind me. The smiling photo of my graduation vanished. The room went pitch black for a second, and then the video from the dashcam began to play. The party was over. The trial had begun. Hunter lunged toward me. The paralysis that had held him captive for the first few seconds of my appearance shattered, replaced by the desperate flailing aggression of a cornered animal. He reached for the microphone in my hand, his fingers clawing at the air, his face contorted into a mask of pure panic. "Security!" he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing painfully through the high-end sound system. "Get her off the stage. She is having a psychotic episode. Someone help her. Do not let her hurt herself." 3 large men in black suits started to move from the edges of the room. They were confused, hesitating for a fraction of a second. They looked from the well-dressed man screaming orders to the woman in the red dress who stood with absolute terrifying calm. That hesitation was all I needed. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply raised my hand, palm out, in a gesture of command so authoritative that the lead guard actually stopped mid-stride. "Stay back," I said. My voice was not loud, but the microphone amplified the cold steel in my tone. "Unless you want to be named as accessories to attempted murder in the federal indictment that is being filed as we speak, you will stay exactly where you are." The guards froze. They were paid to handle drunks and crashers, not legal threats involving federal crimes. Hunter saw his muscle failing him. He turned back to the crowd, sweating profusely under the stage lights. He tried to laugh, a breathless, hysterical sound. "Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive this interruption," he stammered, wiping his forehead with a shaking hand. "My sister-in-law has been through a terrible trauma. The grief has clearly unhinged her mind. She thinks she is the victim of some grand conspiracy. It is tragic, really." I let him finish. I let him dig the hole a little deeper. I let the audience lean in, wondering if maybe he was right. Maybe I was just the crazy girl in the red dress. Then I lifted the small remote control in my left hand. "You are right about one thing, Hunter," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "The truth is tragic. But it is not a conspiracy. It is a movie, and you are the star." I pressed the play button. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying the logo of the fake foundation, turned black for a heartbeat. Then it exploded into light. The grainy, high-contrast footage from the dashcam filled the wall, stretching 20 feet high. The image was dark, swirling with white snow, but the audio was crystal clear. Hattie had done her work well. She had remastered the sound, stripping away the wind noise until the voices were as sharp as broken glass. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. They saw the headlights of the Range Rover. They saw 2 men drag a limp body out of the back seat. And then the voice of the man standing next to me boomed through the speakers. "Stop whining, Desmond. It is the sedative. It slows the heart rate." A collective gasp went through the room. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out at once. I saw the SEC auditors in the back row stand up. I saw the reporters lower their cameras, too shocked to take pictures, staring at the screen with their mouths open. On the screen, the hunter in the video shoved my body toward the ravine. Then came the damning dialogue, the words that would seal his coffin. "Check her breath." Then my father's voice, weak and trembling. "I think I feel something. It is faint." And finally, Hunter's command, delivered with the cold indifference of a butcher. "Is she dead? Then throw her down." The video ended with the sound of my body crashing through the branches and the car engine roaring away. The screen went black again, leaving the image of my abandonment burned into the retinas of 300 witnesses. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a judgment falling. Slowly, every head in the room turned from the screen to Hunter. He was standing at the podium, gripping the wood so hard his knuckles were white. He looked small. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. He looked like exactly what he was, a murderer stripped of his disguise. My mother, Patricia, was sobbing openly now, a wretched keening sound from the front table. My father, Desmond, had put his head on the table, burying his face in his arms, unable to look at the screen or at me. Hunter looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, terrified. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the crowd, searching for an ally, for someone to tell him it was a fake, a deep fake, a lie. But there were no allies left. The donors looked at him with disgust. The investors looked at him with fury. I took a step closer to him. The click of my heels on the stage was the only sound in the room. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. I wanted him to hear me. I wanted him to know that I was the one who ended him. You said in your speech that we are here to honor a memory, I said, my voice ringing out with the finality of a gavel strike. You said today is a day of remembrance. I gestured to the police officers who were now pushing through the doors at the back of the room, led by the chief of police himself. You are right, Hunter. Today is a memorial day. But we are not mourning my death. We are holding a memorial for your freedom. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud that felt like an explosion. I turned my back on him and walked toward the edge of the stage. Behind me, I heard the scuffle of feet, the shout of police orders, and the clicking of handcuffs. But I didn't look back. The monster was in the cage. I was free. The ballroom erupted into chaos that rivaled the storm that had almost killed me. The silence that had held the room captive shattered, instantly replaced by the screams of Chicago's elite scrambling for the exits. Crystal glasses were knocked off tables, shattering under the feet of billionaires running for their lives. The illusion of civility was gone. The police officers who had been waiting at the back of the room surged forward, their weapons drawn, moving in a tactical formation that cut through the panic like a knife. Federal agents dropped to the ground. Now the command boomed over the screams bouncing off the high ceilings. I stood still on the stage, the eye of the hurricane, watching the destruction of the Vance dynasty. Hunter looked wild. His eyes darted from the advancing officers to the exits, realizing every door was blocked. The veneer of the successful CEO had completely dissolved, leaving behind a cornered rat. He reached inside his tuxedo jacket. For a second, I thought he was reaching for a phone to call his lawyer, but when his hand emerged, it was holding a compact silver pistol. Screams erupted again, louder this time. He was not going to surrender. He was too arrogant to accept a cell. He grabbed the person closest to him. It was not me. It was Ebony. He yanked my sister out of her chair by her hair. She shrieked in pain and terror as he spun her around, pressing the barrel of the gun against her temple. Her face, usually so composed and perfect, twisted into a mask of pure horror. She looked at her husband, the man who had bought her Hermes bags and promised her the world, and saw only a stranger willing to trade her life for a few more seconds of freedom. "Back off!" Hunter screamed, his voice cracking. "I will shoot her. I swear to God. I will blow her brains out." The police stopped their guns, trained on his center of mass. The standoff froze the room in a tableau of violence. "Hunter, please." Ebony begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I am your wife. What are you doing?" "Shut up," Hunter roared, tightening his grip on her neck. "You are nothing. You are just leverage." And then the final crack in the family foundation appeared. My father, Desmond, stood up. He was trembling not with bravery, but with the desperate realization that his lifeline was about to snap. He saw the cameras still rolling. He saw the red light of the live broadcast. He knew that if Hunter went down holding a gun, they were all accomplices to a violent maniac. He had to separate himself. He had to be the victim. "He is crazy!" Desmond shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Hunter. "We did not know. He forced us. He threatened to kill us if we did not go along with it." Hunter's eyes widened in betrayal. "You lying old coward," he spat. "You begged me to pay off your bookie. You signed the papers." "It is a lie!" Patricia screamed, joining the fray. She lunged forward, her maternal instinct finally kicking in but twisted by self-preservation. She was not trying to save Ebony, she was trying to silence Hunter. She grabbed a heavy silver candelabra from the table and swung it with all her might. It was a clumsy, desperate blow, but it connected. The heavy silver base slammed into Hunter's shoulder. He howled in pain, his grip on Ebony loosening just enough. Ebony, fueled by adrenaline and rage, didn't run away. She turned and raked her nails down Hunter's face, leaving deep, bloody gouges across his cheeks. The gun went off. Bang! The sound was deafening. A chandelier crystal above us exploded, raining glass down on the stage. The shot missed everyone, but it broke the standoff. The police swarmed. But before they could reach him, my family turned on each other like a pack of starving wolves. Desmond tackled Hunter to the ground. They rolled on the floor in their expensive tuxedos, punching, kicking, and biting. My father was screaming about being innocent while smashing his fist into his son-in-law's face. My mother was hitting Hunter with her purse, shrieking about how he had ruined their reputation. It was grotesque. It was primal. And it was being broadcast live to millions of people. The great Vance family. The pillars of society were tearing each other apart on the floor of the Drake Hotel ballroom. They were stripping away their own dignity faster than any prosecutor ever could. I watched from the stage, looking down at the pile of writhing bodies. I felt Hattie step up beside me. She didn't say a word. She just handed me a glass of water from the podium. I took a sip, watching as the FBI agents finally pulled them apart. They hauled Hunter up first. His face was bleeding, his nose was broken, and his suit was shredded. He looked at me one last time before they shoved his face against the floor to cuff him. There was no defiance left in his eyes, only the hollow realization that he had lost everything. Then they handcuffed Desmond. He was crying, begging the officers to check the emails, claiming he was a hostage. Patricia was hysterical, trying to fix her hair as they zip-tied her wrists, asking if she could call her publicist. Ebony sat on the floor, rubbing her bruised neck, staring blankly at the chaos. She looked up at me. Our eyes met across the room. She waited for me to come to her. She waited for the sisterly comfort she had never given me. She expected me to help her up. I turned away. I walked over to the police chief, who was waiting by the stairs. "An officer," I said, my voice calm and steady amidst the madness. "I have the original will and the digital evidence on this drive. I would like to press charges against all of them." Imani Ebony screamed from the floor. "I did not know. I did not know he would hurt you." I paused and looked back over my shoulder. The camera zoomed in on my face. "You knew, Ebony," I said loud enough for the microphones to catch. "You wore the pearls. You wore the pearls to my funeral." I turned back to the exit. The police dragged them out one by one through the sea of flashing bulbs. The dynasty had not just fallen, it had imploded, and I was the only one left standing in the rubble. The days following the gala were a blur of fluorescent lights and legal briefs. The transition from the gold-drenched ballroom to the sterile gray walls of the Cook County Courthouse was jarring for my family, but for me, it felt like walking into a throne room. I was no longer the victim shivering in the snow. I was the plaintiff, and I had brought the heavy artillery. I sat behind a glass partition in the high-security interrogation room, watching Hunter Vance try to negotiate his way out of a life sentence. He was still wearing his tuxedo shirt, but it was stained with dried blood and sweat. He looked at the federal prosecutor and tried to use his old charm, the smile that had swindled investors for a decade. He offered to flip on my father. He offered to return the insurance money. He offered everything except the truth. My lawyer, a shark named Mr. Sterling, who Hattie had recommended, walked into the room and placed a single document on the metal table. It was not a plea deal. It was a motion for summary judgment regarding the estate of Rosewood Vance. Hunter looked at the paper and sneered. "You cannot touch my personal assets," he said, his voice raspy. "The trust fund is separate. Even if I go to jail, the money stays in the family. I have rights." Mr. Sterling did not smile. He simply leaned forward and whispered two words that made the blood drain from Hunter's face. Slayer rule. In the United States Legal Code, the Slayer statute is clear. A person who kills or attempts to kill another person cannot inherit property from the victim. But my lawyer went further. He invoked the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO. Because Hunter had used the family trust to launder money and cover his debts, every single asset he had touched was now considered proceeds of criminal activity. The scene shifted to the courtroom 3 days later. It was a montage of destruction, a rapid-fire dismantling of the Vance empire. My parents sat at the defense table, huddled together like frightened children. They were not wearing designer clothes anymore. They were wearing orange jumpsuits issued by the county jail. When the judge read the order to freeze their assets, my mother, Patricia, let out a gasp that sounded like a dying breath. The judge's gavel banged down with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The court orders the immediate seizure of the property at 4500 Lakeshore Drive. The court orders the liquidation of the vacation home in Aspen. The court orders the forfeiture of all retirement accounts held in the name of Desmond Vance. My father put his head in his hands and wept. He was not crying for me. He was crying because he was finally broke. He had gambled away his dignity years ago, but now the law was taking his last chip. But the most satisfying moment was reserved for Ebony. My sister had been released on bail pending her trial for conspiracy, but she had made the mistake of showing up to the asset forfeiture hearing wearing the spoils of war. She walked into the courtroom wearing a Chanel suit, carrying a Birkin bag, and flashing a diamond ring that cost more than my college tuition. She thought she could still play the part of the heiress. She thought the courtroom was a runway. She stood before the judge, her chin held high, defiant to the end. She claimed she was a victim of her husband's schemes. She claimed she knew nothing about the plot to kill me. She claimed the house and the cars were hers by right. The judge looked at her over the rim of his glasses. He looked at the evidence file I had provided. The receipts showing Ebony using trust fund money to buy jewelry while I was living in a motel. The emails where she discussed spending my death benefit on a trip to France. "Ms. Vance," the judge said, his voice booming through the chamber, "you are currently in possession of stolen property. The court orders the immediate surrender of all items purchased with funds from the Rosewood Vance Trust." Ebony looked confused. She blinked, her false eyelashes fluttering. "I do not understand," she said. "My lawyer is handling the transfers." The judge pointed a finger at her. "I am not talking about bank transfers. I am talking about what is on your person right now." Bailiff seized the defendant's handbag and jewelry. 2 court officers approached her. Ebony took a step back, clutching her Birkin bag to her chest like it was a baby. "No!" she shrieked. "You cannot take this. It is mine. Hunter gave it to me." The officer did not hesitate. He reached out and ripped the bag from her grip. Ebony screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure materialistic agony. It was the sound of a woman whose soul was made of leather and gold being torn apart. "The ring too, ma'am," the officer said, holding out his hand. Ebony looked down at the massive diamond on her finger. It was the symbol of her status, the proof that she was better than me. She tried to pull it off, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't do it. The officer had to help her, sliding the ring off her finger. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. It was not a dignified cry. It was an ugly tantrum. She screamed about her rights. She screamed that it was unfair. She looked at me sitting in the front row, and her eyes were filled with hatred. "You did this," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You jealous little brat, you took everything." I stood up slowly and walked to the partition. I looked at my sister, the golden child who was now tarnished beyond repair. I looked at the empty spot on her finger and the empty space where her arrogance used to be. I did not take anything, Ebony. I said, my voice calm enough to be heard by the entire courtroom. I just took back what Grandma left me. And as for the jealousy, you are right. I was jealous once. I was jealous that you had parents who loved you. But now I realize they didn't love you either. They just loved what you cost. I turned to the bailiff who was holding the bag and the ring. Put them in the evidence locker, I said, or sell them. I do not care. Just make sure the money goes to the charity. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving my family in the wreckage of their own greed. The sound of Ebony's screaming followed me into the hallway, but for the first time in my life it didn't hurt. It sounded like music. The legal war was over. The paperwork was signed. I was $10 million richer, but the real wealth was knowing that I never had to see their faces again. The Cook County Correctional Facility smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a smell that stuck to the back of your throat, a stark contrast to the lavender and vanilla perfume my mother used to marinate in. I sat in the visitation booth on a metal stool bolted to the floor. The room was cold, but it did not bother me. After a night in a blizzard, I was immune to the temperature of a government building. I was wearing a white cashmere coat that cost more than my father's bail would have been, had the judge granted him one. I sat with my hands folded on the stainless steel shelf, watching the heavy metal door on the other side of the glass. When the door buzzed open, a guard led her in. For a moment I did not recognize the woman shuffling toward the seat. Patricia Vance had always been a creature of vanity. She was a woman who would not walk to the mailbox without full makeup and a blowout. The woman in the orange jumpsuit had gray roots showing at her temples. Her face was puffy and devoid of color. Her eyes, usually sharp with criticism, were red-rimmed and hollow. She looked small. She looked old. She looked exactly like what she was, a criminal who had lost her gamble. She sat down and picked up the black phone receiver. Her hand was shaking. I picked up mine, the plastic cool against my ear. "Imani," she breathed. Her voice was a cracked whisper. "Oh God, Imani. You came. I knew you would come. You are a good girl. You have always been my good girl." I stared at her, my face a mask of indifference. I did not speak. I just let her talk. I let her fill the silence with her desperation. "It is a nightmare in here, baby," she continued, leaning closer to the glass. "You have to get me out. You have the money now. You can hire a better lawyer. That public defender is useless. He says I am looking at 20 years. 20 years, Imani. I will die in here." She paused, waiting for me to offer reassurance, waiting for me to say, "Don't worry, Mommy, I will fix it." When I stayed silent, her eyes darted around nervously and she switched tactics. She went from begging to blaming. "It was Hunter," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "You know that, right? He made us do it. He is a monster. He threatened your father. He threatened me. We were terrified. I wanted to call the police, Imani. I swear on my life I wanted to call them. But he said he would kill us all. I was trying to protect the family." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather and not conspiracy to commit murder. "You stepped over me," I said. Patricia blinked, confused. "What?" "At the cabin," I said. "After I drank the cocoa. I fell on the floor. I was paralyzed, but I could still feel. You stepped over my legs to get to the wine bottle. You did not check my pulse. You did not cry. You just stepped over me like I was a piece of furniture you had been meaning to throw out." Patricia's face crumpled. Tears began to spill down her cheeks, but they felt rehearsed. It was the same performance she had given at my funeral. "I was in shock," she wailed. "I was not thinking straight. Imani, please. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. Doesn't that mean anything to you? We are flesh and blood. You cannot leave me in here with these animals." She pressed her palm against the glass. "Look at me, baby. I am sorry. I am so, so sorry. I love you. I have always loved you. We can start over. Just tell the judge you forgive me. Tell them I was a victim too. Please. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. I looked at her hand on the glass. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband drag me into the snow and then went back to sleep in a warm bed. I thought about the Hattie, a stranger who had rubbed warmth back into my frozen limbs, while my own mother was planning a memorial service to cash a check. I leaned forward. I looked deep into her weeping eyes, searching for a shred of genuine humanity, but I found only fear. She did not love me. She loved her freedom. She loved her comfort, and she was using the biology between us as a last-ditch currency to buy it back. You are right, I said softly. Patricia's face lit up with hope. She thought she had won. She thought the guilt trip had worked. I am, she asked, sniffing. Yes, I said. You are right that blood is thicker than water. I paused, letting the hope bloom in her chest for one cruel second before I crushed it. But blood is also what attracts sharks, Patricia. And it freezes faster than water, too. Her smile faltered. The hope died in her eyes, replaced by a dawn of horror. You talk about blood like it is a bond, I continued, my voice hardening into diamond. But that night in the ravine, my blood almost turned to ice because of you. You want to talk about family? Family is the woman who found me in the snow. Family is the woman who taught me how to survive. You are just an accessory to a crime. I stood up. I placed the receiver back on the hook, but I did not let go of it yet. I wanted her to hear the click. Imani. No. She screamed, her voice muffled through the glass but still audible. You cannot do this. I am your mother. I leaned down to the microphone one last time. My mother died a long time ago, I said. She died the day she chose a heavy coat over her daughter's life. I looked her up and down, taking in the orange jumpsuit, the gray hair, the utter ruin of her existence. Goodbye, Patricia, I said. Enjoy the cage. You built it yourself. I hung up the phone. I turned my back on the glass. I could hear her screaming behind me. I could hear her fists pounding against the plexiglass, a dull, rhythmic thudding. It sounded far away, like a storm that had passed. I walked out of the visitation room and into the corridor. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me with a finality that vibrated through the floor. I walked out of the prison and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. The air was crisp and cold, but for the first time in weeks, I did not shiver. I felt warm. I felt light. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the taste of freedom. I had no mother. I had no father. And I had never been happier. The memory of that heavy steel door slamming shut fades away, replaced by the soft crackle of the fireplace in my penthouse. I take a sip of the vintage Cabernet, the liquid warm and rich against my tongue, a stark contrast to the bitter taste of the cheap prison coffee I imagined my mother drinking right now. 5 years have passed since that day in the visitation room. 5 years since I walked out of the shadow of the Vance family and stepped into the light of my own life. I stand up and walk to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago lies spread out below me, a grid of golden lights shimmering through the falling snow. It is beautiful from up here. When you are 20 floors up, wrapped in silk and safety, the snow does not look like a weapon. It looks like confetti celebrating a victory. Behind me, I hear the soft click of the door opening. I do not flinch. I do not panic. I know exactly who it is. A woman walks into the room. She is no longer wearing layers of dirty rags. She is wearing a tailored navy blue suit that screams executive competence. Her gray hair, once matted under a beanie, is now cut into a stylish silver bob that frames her sharp, intelligent face. Ms. Hattie, my savior, my partner, my real family. She carries a silver tray with a fresh bottle of wine and a small plate of dark chocolate. She moves with the grace of a woman who has reclaimed her dignity, a woman who knows she belongs in the boardroom, just as much as she knows how to survive the alleyway. You are staring at the snow again? Hattie says, her voice raspy but warm. You are thinking about them, aren't you? I turn to face her. I am thinking about how far we have come, I reply. Hattie sets the tray down on the marble coffee table. She pours herself a glass and joins me by the window. We stand side by side looking out at the city we conquered. The foundation is doing good work, Hattie says, taking a sip. We funded 3 new shelters this week, and the scholarship program for kids in the foster system just sent its first graduate to Harvard. You are doing what they never could, Imani. You are building a legacy on kindness, not greed. I smile. It is true. I used the $10 million and the millions more we recovered from Hunter's fraud to build the safety net I never had. I became the person I needed when I was 20 years old. Do you ever check on them? Hattie asks quietly. I shake my head. I have no need to. I know where they are. Hunter is serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security facility in Indiana. My father died of a heart attack in his cell 2 years ago. A man who lived by gambling finally ran out of luck. And my mother. She is still in that orange jumpsuit telling anyone who will listen that she is the victim waiting for a daughter who will never come back. Ebony is working at a diner in Ohio, living under a different name, trying to outrun a reputation that will follow her forever. They are ghosts, I say, and I do not believe in being haunted anymore. Hattie nods, satisfied. She raises her glass in a toast. To survival. To revenge, I correct her, clinking my glass against hers. And to the future. We drink, and the silence between us is comfortable. It is the silence of 2 soldiers who have fought in the same trench and lived to tell the tale. I look at Hattie, and I feel a swell of emotion that feels unfamiliar but welcome. It is gratitude. It is love. People often ask me how I can be so cold. They ask how I could send my own flesh and blood to prison without shedding a tear. They quote the old saying to me. They tell me that blood is thicker than water. I look back out at the storm swirling against the glass. The wind is howling, trying to find a way in, but the glass is thick. The heat is on. I am safe. They are wrong. I say, speaking more to the reflection in the window than to Hattie. People get the quote wrong. The full proverb is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. I turn back to Hattie, the woman who pulled me out of the ice when my own father threw me in. Family is not about whose DNA you carry, I tell her. Family is not about a last name or a birth certificate. Family are the people who are willing to bleed for you, not the ones who are trying to drain you dry. Family are the ones who pull you into the shelter when the storm comes, not the ones who lock the door. I smile, and for the first time in a long time it reaches my eyes. It is not the smile of a victim. It is not even the smile of a survivor. It is the smile of a winner. I have found my family, I say. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I belong. I turn off the lamp, plunging the room into a soft darkness, illuminated only by the city lights and the fire. Hattie and I sit by the warmth, watching the snow fall, 2 queens in a castle built on the ruins of wolves. The snow keeps falling, burying the past layer by layer until everything is white, clean, and new. Fade out. Imani's journey reveals a harsh truth: shared DNA does not guarantee loyalty. We often cling to toxic relationships out of obligation, believing history equals love. But true family isn't defined by a birth certificate. It is defined by the people who stand beside you when the storm hits. Imani proved that survival sometimes means cutting the cord, and that the strongest bonds are the ones we choose, not the ones we inherit. Never let your history destroy your future. Have you ever found family in an unexpected place or had to cut ties to save your peace? Share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more tales of resilience and justice.